Morning, everyone. The stream of people entering the Zoom room is starting to slow down, so I think we can get started. Welcome to BIO's June Coffee Chat, which is so aptly called "Running on Empty: Threats to Early Stage Drug Development." I'm so excited to have a really amazing, stellar panel of experts here with me today. And I will ask each of them to introduce themselves and their organizations in a second because they will do a much better job than I ever could. But just really briefly, we have Dr. John Campbell, PhD, who is the chief scientist of the National Pharmaceutical Council. We have Sarah Jones, who is an amazing patient advocate and here representing the Eosinophilic and Rare Disease Cooperative, and Lisa Schlager, who is here representing FORCE, the Facing Our Risk of Cancer Empowered, and an amazing cancer patient advocate. In the chat, you will see their amazing bios. We're not going to spend any time on them, but you have them in the chat. And again, for each of you, as you get started, it would be fantastic if you would start just really briefly introducing yourself, your organization, and what brought you into patient advocacy or into the work that you do. With that, John, would you like to go first?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Karen. Good to be with you and you all this afternoon. As Karen mentioned, my name is John Campbell. I'm the Chief Science Officer here at the National Pharmaceutical Council, or NPC for short. NPC is a 70-year-old member-based nonprofit organization supported by leading biopharmaceutical companies that are all committed to facilitating research that is rigorous, timely, and gets to the heart of pressing health policy issues. So, with that, NPC serves patients and society with policy relevant research on the value of patient access to innovative medicines. And at NPC, we envision a world where advances in medicines are accessible to patients, valued by society, and sustainably reimbursed by payers to ensure continued innovation. So that's really at the heart of what we do here at NPC. We do research, we don't lobby. Um, so it's great to partner with organizations like Bio and patient advocates in our work. Speaking as a researcher and a scientist, our work takes on meaning through the patient voice and in working with patient advocates like you all. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to work together and to learn from each other in the ways that we all bring our expertise to the table. And I think that's what we're really talking about here today in a particular topic with some concerning research that that can impact patients' lives. And so we'll look forward to getting into that with you all. My training and background is in health economics and outcomes research. I started my career on an academic faculty appointment and have also served in roles in health technology assessment before coming to NPC. So, Karen, thank you so much for the invitation and look forward to the discussion today with Lisa and with Sarah.
Thank you so much for being here and for your willingness to dive into some of that data that you mentioned that I think is really informative. Um, Lisa, you're next on my screen. Would you mind briefly introducing yourself, the amazing organization that you represent, and maybe your path into patient advocacy?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Karen. And good to see everyone. My name's Lisa Schlager. I am the Vice President of Public Policy for an organization called Facing Our Risk of Cancer Empowered, which is a mouthful, so we say FORCE for short. Our focus, the organization itself is about 26 years old, and our focus is specifically hereditary cancers. So people who carry an inherited genetic mutation, such as the BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation, or Lynch syndrome, or many of the other dozens of mutations that have been discovered that increase the risk of a variety of cancers. And my path into this role of being a patient advocate is actually very personal. I carry a BRCA1 genetic mutation myself, and I was basically trying to decide what I wanted to do, in a career path change and realized that I wanted to do something that was meaningful to me, both personally and professionally. So this is how I got involved with Force and have been very fortunate to help grow the organization to the place that it is today. So happy to be here and very excited to talk about this important topic.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here and for the amazing work that you and Force are doing. And obviously, we'll dive much deeper into that as we go over this hour together. But before we go there, Sarah, would you briefly introduce yourself, the amazing organization that you represent, and what brought you to where you are today?
Sure. Thanks for having me on today. I was diagnosed with 4.5 years ago with a very rare disease that impacts 2 in a million people, EGPA, eosinophilic granulomatosis polyangiitis, which is a very rare form of vasculitis. And it, changed my whole life. Prior to that, I had run nonprofits. My wife had been a medical social worker. And then when I got sick, um, we identified some real issues in the rare disease community and some unmet needs in the rare disease community. And so we got busy and started ERDC. So we are an organization that is 100% focused on access to quality care, medications, and treatments. That is really, what we're focused on. We're a patient and care partner run organization. We like to say we're small and scrappy, but I think we're mighty with our small and scrappy. We really focus on not duplicating. Um, I think one of the key pieces for our organization that we stay focused on is that we're really connected at a patient level because we're a patient and care partner organization. So we hear the unfiltered um, pain points of people living with these rare diseases and work hard to try to translate that into policy and action so that people can actually do something about it. And last year, I think we served 40 different rare diseases. Our primary rare diseases are vasculitis, myasthenia gravis, IgG4 at the current time, but we serve a large number.
Thank you so much for the amazing work that you are doing. And we're here today to talk about innovation and both the power of innovation and the threats to it. So, Sarah, if we can stay with you for a second, in particular, serving so many rare diseases that are starting to have treatments available, but also so many that still have large unmet medical needs. Can you talk a little bit about kind of why you're here today? Why is innovation so important? Why are you so concerned about the challenges that we are seeing and the negative policy impacts of things like the Inflation Reduction Act that are impacting, as we will see today, that early stage research? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think when I come to it with a patient perspective, frankly, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to know that, only 5% of rare diseases have treatments. I mean, that's unconscionable. I think one of the greatest challenges when you're talking about rare diseases is that there are a lot of us with a rare disease, but it's like a million little silos, and then you add that to how government operates, which is a million little silos. You want to talk about tariffs impact on healthcare, and you can't talk to the healthcare people because that's with the tariff people who really don't know about healthcare. And you kind of wonder how all of this pulls together um, to make an impact. When I think about like my particular disease, EGPA, um, people with my disease without treatments have a life expectancy of 5 years. And thank goodness that I'm on treatments. Most of them are not indicated for my disease. So that's a whole nother coffee chat, right? About the fact that trying to get insurance to cover things that aren't indicated, even when there aren't medications, but most of them aren't indicated. Vasculitis, for mine, it impacts all small and medium vessels, which means that it impacts basically all of the organs in the body. And what it's doing is it's slowly killing the organs. And that's why people die from it. There are 20 different vasculitis. So I say vasculitis, there are 20 different forms of vasculitis. There are only 9 medications indicated for vasculitis, and that's actually only 5 of the diseases. And so the need is just, the need is just there. And for most of us, I always tell the people that I'm meeting with, in the legislature, that these are not niceties. These are not, feel-good medications. These are literally life and death medications. And so every single medication and treatment means that someone is going to live longer, and frankly, it's going to save, the healthcare system. I don't even know how much money from the downstream impact. I mean, it was what, 59 doctor's appointments to get diagnosed, and numerous hospital visits and hospital stays. So you think about, people look at the money of these things, but they're forgetting to look at the downstream cost of not having treatments, which is exponential.
Amazing. And Lisa, representing the heritable cancer community, I know we've seen tremendous progress and innovation, but there's also this looming threat that this innovation could go away. So can you talk a little bit about what innovation means for you and your community?
Yes, absolutely. And I think Sarah hit on a couple of common themes, regardless of what type of disease we're talking about. One is basically the types, there's lots of rare diseases. Well, there are also lots of types of cancer. Like breast cancer is just not just one type of breast cancer. And it's similar with all different body indicated cancers. The other thing is functioning in silos. I do think that we are seeing government agencies functioning in these silos. And one of the biggest issues is I think they're looking at saving money from the perspective of existing therapies. And that's great. I think, we want to make patients or help patients have access to therapies, and accessibility and affordability is important. But what about the patients that have no therapies? And so these policies are having unintended consequences, or they have no therapies that are really a good therapy for them. So for our community, you might not think of cancer as a rare disease, but when you start looking at the application of genetics and genomics in healthcare, we now can look at specific cancers like ovarian cancer, which is a relatively rare cancer. But when you slice it down to ovarian cancer patients with a very specific genetic mutation, which is a targetable, then that's a much smaller population. We have a similar situation with pancreatic cancer. If you look at people with pancreatic cancer who have a BRCA mutation, that's a much smaller sliver of the overall population. And as we dive more into genetics and genomics in the healthcare space, we're going to see more and more of this because they're developing, ideally, therapies that target the genomic foundations of these diseases. But if there's not an incentive to develop those therapies, because the number of people who may benefit are, not huge numbers, then everybody loses out. The patients, first and foremost, because they're the ones who don't have a good therapy available to them that can help them fight the disease and hopefully either, cure the disease, which I know is not a great word, but at least extend life. Then they're the ones who lose the most. But also the healthcare system loses because then you have sicker patients, and the costs for caring for them are more, are higher, and they have a lot more quality of life issues potentially that uh, the health insurers have to pay for. I do think that our system tends to look at things, at least from the government perspective and also from the payer perspective, through a very short-term lens. And that is problematic because we really need to be looking at long term. What are the long term costs? What are the long term benefits? And so that's something that we've really been vocal about when it comes to the Orphan Cures Act. Our community benefited tremendously from the Orphan Drug Act. It helped us benefit our communities in the ovarian and pancreatic spaces, benefited from PARP inhibitors and the incentives that were provided. And then when it went to a larger population, then it was no longer considered a rare indication, and that's fine. But under the new proposal, or the way that the IRA has been written and implemented, we wouldn't see that progress for our community. It just, after that first indication, there is absolutely no reason that a pharmaceutical company would invest in a second rare indication. They just don't have the incentive to do so. So, I know I've mentioned a few different topics here, but again, I think we need to look toward not just focusing on accessibility and affordability for existing therapies, but also incentivizing the development of new therapies for the patients who don't have a good treatment out there.
Couldn't agree more. And so I saw a lot of head nodding from you as well. Um, I know over the last few years, I've gotten a lot of questions around are these impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act on early stage drug development and on follow-on indications, are those theoretical or are those real? And I know, John, you and NPC have just done some data that really show that there is a tangible, measurable impact that can be shown in the data. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the new study that you all did, what the study showed, and why NPC decided to study this issue.
I'm happy to, Karen. And it's always dangerous asking a researcher to summarize research to a group of patient advocates. But let me attempt that, and let's have a conversation. And if folks have questions or comments that they'd like to add, I'd welcome that along the way. So, as some of you may have realized, we just recently published an NPC policy and evidence brief titled "Early Signals of the IRA on Orphan Drugs." So we'll get into some of that work together. But before I do, just to touch on some of the things that Lisa and Sarah have already mentioned, I think there is some of this natural trade-off that the government is faced with the IRA in terms of wanting to try to have affordability today, but some concerns about the unintended consequence of that desire and how it relates to patient access today, as well as innovation in the future. So it's in those two topic areas that NPC has conducted work that's theoretical, but around the time once we knew that IRA was coming to be, and importantly, now that we can start to look for some of those early signals and actually observed findings after we've had some experience with the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'll speak a little bit about that with you all today in terms of a particular study, the early signals on orphan drugs. Why we did this study is a number of fold, but I think it starts with the well-intended orphan drug exclusion for the drug price negotiation program. So some of you may be familiar with that exclusion. This exclusion aims to prevent the selection of orphan drugs used to help people living with rare diseases. However, there are some concerns about the ODE, or this orphan drug exclusion's impact on the incentives for ongoing rare disease clinical development. Developers of drugs with a single orphan designation may be less likely to pursue a second or multiple orphan drug designations in additional rare diseases because the current application of the orphan drug exclusion by CMS would restore the drug's eligibility for the drug price negotiation selection and the corresponding negotiations that occur with the government. So, in other words, medicines that have one and only one orphan drug designation are excluded from negotiation in the drug price negotiation program. Those with more than one designation can be included. And that's part of the concern that we have around, really at the end of the day, patient access first starts with regulatory approval of a medicine in an indication. And when we don't have those indications named, we often have less evidence about a medicine and its use in other populations. And so to get those medicines to all those who may benefit from the medicine, we really need that research and the incentive to bring those medicines to as many designations and then corresponding approvals as possible. So that's what we're discussing today in our research here at NPC. After identifying that concern about when a medicine goes from one designation to more than one, and how they play out in the drug price negotiation program, we were curious to do some work inside our enterprise lab, as we call it here at NPC. We have a group of researchers conducting work here at NPC alongside myself, and some of those are named in this report. So those folks are Julie Patterson, Hanky Zhang, James Motika, and also had support from our communications team with Devin Bortz producing work in this report. The reason we published this particular report in an NPC policy and evidence brief was because we felt it was really timely to conversations going on right now around this orphan drug exclusion, and we felt like getting this evidence out into the public domain as soon as possible would be helpful. So some of our curiosities were basically that because IRA has only been with us for a couple of years, there's only certain kinds of research that we felt we can do at this point in time to really observe the potential unintended consequences of IRA and the drug price negotiation program in particular. We felt that this designation, going from one designation and one indication to more than one, might be an area that we would see an early signal. And so that was part of our motivation to conduct this observational work. To jump into the work itself, I'll say a few things. I'll say first what the analysis found, and then we can, if you have curiosities about some of the methods, we can certainly go there. But our analysis found that the number of drugs receiving a first orphan designation, both pre and post IRA, were largely consistent over time. So that can be considered some good news for patients in terms of medicines that are continuing to be studied and developed, medicines that manufacturers are going after that first orphan designation over time has largely been consistent. So we see a pretty flat line in terms of that first orphan designation signal, and yet what we're seeing in addition to that is now looking before IRA, so before into the late teens, 2017 through 2022 and 23. In that period, we had second designations that ran at a much more frequent pace than they did post IRA approval, and that's really the concerning signal that we wanted to talk about today. The percentage of drugs with the first orphan designation that later received a second designation decreased by about half. So we're seeing half medicines that we did before IRA now go on to to get that second designation. And again, that has some really concerning signals for patient access. So this data, I'll say, is preliminary in nature. We want to try to address any potential confounding signals that we'd see, that lurking variables that may explain some of those differences. And yet that signal is very large. Having a 50% approximately reduction in second designations is something that we're quite concerned about, and I believe you all are too. So happy to discuss that in more detail as we get into the panel. Karen, is that a good place to pause?
I think that is fantastic, and I would love to follow up. I mean, there's so much to unpack, but Sarah, you had mentioned what it means to try to get access to therapies that work but that are not labeled and not indicated for the disease. Can you talk a little bit more, based on your experience, why it is so important to have that second designation and hopefully that second approval for a second disease?
Oh, oh, absolutely. I can tell you that the medications for my disease are all the second designation, and it is essential. I mean, the reality is it's so expensive to do drug development, of course, and what 9 out of 10 fail. So, I mean, the cost is just prohibitive for people to do extensive drug development on really small populations. And so I think that the ability to take the smart and courageous and powerful work that's already been done on a medication or a treatment and kind of think, oh, what else could this work on? Is just, I mean, that's the only way to do it. And frankly, it is the cost saving way to do it. And I always think about, and when we're trying to translate this, I think one of the things we're aware of is, when you've got a rare disease, trying to activate the community and the patient population to be part of the voice in this. When you've got a rare disease, I mean, there are days you can't even think about trying to chew your food. It hurts to chew your food. You're so tired. There are really no words for all of that. And so to activate the community, we just have to make this stuff bite size. We have to take all of this really important data and translate it into what people are feeling, what people are experiencing so that they can actually, take action. And so one of the things we say to them is, why would somebody want to invest in your drug research versus the next iPhone? I mean, something that translates to the general community, I think, is how we're going to get people to understand, and I mean the community, the patient population, to activate the patient population to understand what this means. Because most of us, and honestly, I think Lisa references too with the cancer medications, most of us benefit from the multiple designations. And it's devastating. I can't, to not have that.
Lisa, I see a lot of head nodding, and I know you mentioned before that, in particular with cancer, there's so many subtypes, and there's so much need for additional innovation in the therapeutic area, in particular in cancer, after that first approval. Can you talk a little bit more about your reaction to the research that John just mentioned, and what does that second indication mean to your community?
It absolutely verifies and resonates with me and with our community's viewpoints. When PARP inhibitors were first created, they were the initial indication was for, or the initial approval was for ovarian cancer patients with BRCA mutations. And then, the companies decided they wanted to get an indication for BRCA mutation carriers with pancreatic cancer. And that probably would not have happened under the current scenario. And that's really disturbing because when you think about pancreatic cancer and ovarian cancer, these are incredibly deadly cancers. The 5-year survival rate is very low. And any chance that these patients have at extending life or beating the disease is crucial. And so we want to see development of those therapies. I do think that a lot of what we're dealing with is sort of an anti-pharmaceutical industry mentality. If I hate to say it, but a lot of folks don't understand what it takes to develop a therapy, like how much time and manpower and money, and how many therapies, fail before one comes to market. And so I do think there's room for education around that, to explain to lawmakers as well as our patient community why therapies do cost what they cost and why, for rare indications, it's so important to incentivize them. Because there's no way that a pharmaceutical company is going to make enough money off of a rare indication compared to if they held off and waited until they could prove that it works for a much larger patient population. But we don't want to wait that long. Our patients don't have the time to wait. For many people, this is life or death. And so, and that's sort of the crux of the whole issue is the desire to incentivize the development of these treatments for groups that might otherwise not have anything. And everything Sarah said resonates with me. What John said resonates. There are balances. We absolutely want to see affordable therapies for patients, but at the same time, having an affordable therapy versus no therapy, I mean, that's sort of the choice here, in a lot of cases. And people are suffering, and we want to make sure we have some of the smartest scientists in the world. We want to make sure that they have the ability to work on these therapies and treatments that can benefit the patients who need them.
Thank you both so much for that. So, John, hearing this, what has been the reaction to the data and the amazing work that NPC has done on the Inflation Reduction Act in general? What has been the reaction and what is next for you? As you said, it's still relatively early days. Rare disease drug development or drug development takes time, and so we're starting to see early impacts. But what is next for you all?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And before I go there, I do want to give a shout out around the Orphan Cures Act, and how important that might be given this kind of data, right? That it's important because it provides a critical legislative fix to the one of the unintended consequences of the current law, and it could ensure that innovations in rare disease treatments will continue to be incentivized. So just want to make sure we get that in for today's discussion. And it ensures it in really two ways, right? It can be that the Orphan Cures Act will help to ensure products that are exclusively for rare diseases remain protected from negotiation. So that's number one. And number two, to clarify that the timeline used to determine when an orphan drug may become eligible for negotiation begins at the product's first non-rare disease approval. There are many critics that will suggest, oh, many products come to market in a rare condition and then move to a non-rare condition. And so the Orphan Cures Act would still suggest that medicines that move into non-rare conditions could be negotiated and could be eligible for the drug price negotiation program. But the timing at which they're eligible is also an important aspect to this. So the Orphan Cures Act does do what we believe are some incentives to develop medicines in rare conditions, and does so importantly with evidence, right? And I think there was a comment in the chat that talked a bit about how medicines that are approved in an indication can then are much easier to be a part of a formulary, to have a lower out-of-pocket expense for patients, and that all starts with good evidence. Good evidence, something that we think about at NPC here is that good evidence is the starting point for good policy, and so having that at the patient level is really important. In terms of follow-up work here at NPC, as I sort of alluded to at the top, we're involved in a number of aspects of first, we've theorized some impacts of IRA and the unintended consequences in both terms of future innovation as well as in patient access. And we're in the midst of some work in both of those topic areas looking for observed signals now that were first theorized. And so one of those areas just recently came out in a publication in the journal Therapeutic Innovation and Regulatory Science. That work again is in this theme of subsequent indications, in that we looked at medicines that are approved and on the market, and we looked at industry funded trials for those medicines and have been seeing some pretty dramatic drops in those trials, which would be a leading edge of getting additional indications approved for those medicines that are already on the market. And so we're seeing some of those signals occur not only for biologic medicines, but importantly, larger signals for small molecules. And as some that might know the Inflation Reduction Act well, there is what we call the pill penalty that has a shorter time clock for medicines to be negotiated that are considered small molecules. So those medicines can be negotiated and eligible after 7 years on the market rather than 11 years for biologic products. And that is another concerning part of the Inflation Reduction Act that may have a number of unintended consequences that are bad for patient access. So we're in the midst of some of that work. Some of it's coming out, and look forward to continuing to roll out good evidence for good policy making.
Karen, could I mention one other thing that struck me as I was listening to?
Absolutely.
Okay, to John and Lisa, I was thinking about, another reason why we so desperately need not just the research, but the additional designations is that if a medication is not indicated for the disease, you can't access copay assistance. So there's a lot of financial challenges for people. So not just, the burden and hurdles of trying to get it actually allowed at all, but then you don't have, companies aren't allowed to provide medication assistance and copay assistance for non-indicated medication. And, having a rare disease is expensive, right? Between the treatments and the doctor's visits and all of that, it's very expensive. So sometimes that can become, frankly, cost prohibitive to even access a treatment if they can't get assistance.
Not to mention insurance coverage at all.
Right?
If it's off-label, a lot of insurers don't want to cover it. And it becomes sort of a fight, not only to get access to the medication, but then also, is there a medication that's appropriate for me? So it's sort of a double-edged sword. I agree. And I want to, for what John is sharing with us, I think data is so important. Because every time we go in and talk to lawmakers, basically they say, show me the data. They're like, prove it. Prove to me this is an issue. And it's great to have patient stories, but ultimately it's that combination of data and the patient stories that makes the real impact. So I know we've been going in and talking to lawmakers about our concerns and asking them to support the Orphan Cures Act. But having the data to back that up now is going to be so much more powerful. And so I think that's where we have a great partnership when industry and patient groups work together, because we don't necessarily have the resources to get that data. And so some, groups like pharma and others and are able to pull those data together to really support the patient groups. And I just from our work at Force, and numerous times we've approached industry partners and said, hey, we need help gathering information on X. And they've been willing to support us. So very pleased to see that we have data around this, and I think it's only going to the ability to supplement that will only increase over time if this bill, the Orphan Cures Act, does not get passed as part of the reconciliation package, which fingers crossed, we just don't know at this point because there's so much uncertainty.
That is fantastic. And just to follow up, I know both FORCE and ERDC have done a lot of educating on this issue. I know we're in a hopeful, positive position where the Orphan Cures Act was included in the reconciliation package, where we have seen it being reintroduced in the Senate, where I think all the signals are that hopefully we can fix this problem. But Lisa, so what have been your experiences? And Lisa, you already started to allude to it, but what have been your experiences advocating for orphan cures?
I will say that most offices are receptive and interested in understanding our community's viewpoints. At the same time, I think we are living in a very partisan environment. And unfortunately, lawmakers are a bit averse to departing from the party line. So there is this perception that that conservatives are anti-IRA and therefore they would be more likely to support orphan cures, whereas Democrats are more, pro-IRA, and so they feel the need to fall in line and not support any change, what they perceive as changes to the IRA. And what we've tried to explain to these individuals is that we think this was a mistake. It was an oversight. Whenever you pass a large piece of legislation with multiple components, there are bound to be nuances or little oversights or errors. And we think this was either somebody just not understanding the process for rare disease, rare therapy development, or just an oversight. And so that's sort of our viewpoint that you're not going against your party. You are basically supporting patients and their ability to access and hopefully new therapies that are developed for their diseases. And it is, the number of orphan therapies out there and the dollars that would be saved compared to a therapy that serves the broader population, for instance, like, a diabetes medication. Those are the drugs that, make sense to negotiate, not the ones that are for these small communities who have nothing, very little out there for them. And so that's kind of the messaging we've tried to emphasize. And of course, having additional data behind it is helpful as well. So I don't know, Sarah, have you had similar experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say both at the House and the Senate, the people we've talked to at both places have had the exact same sort of response in terms of the partisan response. We definitely have heard that. And we also have been talking about how it is an oversight. I think they were trying to correct what they perceived as something that might have been used too frequently and did not account for the rare diseases in that. I think it's a tricky one. We because of the partisan nature, and I think what we've been starting to try to do more is engage our community because we know that they do pay attention to how many people are contacting them about an issue. We know that actually does make a difference versus just hearing from us. So, we've started to do some letters where we ask constituents to sign on a letter to engage people. And then again, though, just trying to break that down to a bite size, not explaining the whole law, but explain just a single piece of it and why this matters so that people can get engaged and make phone calls. Because I think that increasing the noise level, I mean, there's the noise level is so high all the time. So somehow we have to increase the noise level to say that this matters. That's what we're really focused on right now, is engaging the community. Just last week we delivered a message or a letter to Gallegos, Kelly from Arizona. That's where we're based. So a letter to the 2 senators, as well as the House, I think about 4 House members, asking them to be co-sponsors. And I think it had about 80 signatures on it from people in the community with a rare disease or impacted by a rare disease that said this matters. And I think that's going to be really key. Advocating and activating our networks so that organizations that are on today and listening today, I think that's going to be key. But to do that, I think we do have to break it down.
John, it looked like you might have had some reactions. Anything you want to add?
Well, I was just going to reflect on something that Lisa said about, the data and evidence being so helpful. I would say back to our patient advocate and patient communities, that research that becomes data and evidence really has the most impact when we can partner and when we can hear from you all what the really pressing issues are, such that we can explore the right topics. So because at NPC, like in partnership with Bio and others, we want our research to make a difference and to be communicated with impact. So to do that well really starts with collaborative insights and signals around where would data and evidence be most helpful in what we call, in a positive light, policy opportunities, right? So looking for those policy opportunities and looking for how evidence can be most helpful really is in partnership with you all. So I guess it's just a call to reach out to either myself or to others at NPC when you do feel like evidence is missing, but that could be really helpful, and we could then begin a conversation around how best to develop that evidence in partnership. So it's a fig leaf of sorts, but also really important to make sure that our work makes the most impact.
Absolutely. And as both Sarah and Lisa had alluded to prior, we're in a time where we see the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, but we see also other policies that are impacting that rare disease or that early drug development, and where I know a lot of groups have a lot of concerns about the long-term viability of that ecosystem. I know whether it's most favored nation type drug pricing policies, whether it's the impact of tariffs, or lots of other things, the expiration of important incentive programs like the pediatric priority review vouchers, all of these come together and it's almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. And so, Lisa and Sarah, I know you both in your organizations have advocated on some of these broader, or the convolution of some of these issues before. I was wondering if you, for the last 5 minutes or so, have anything to add for how you think about that broader ecosystem. And then John, would love from your, if there's anything that you all at NPC are tracking that are kind of trying to take that macro look, ultimately the impact on patients.
I mean, I can just say from our organization, absolutely, we're talking about the broader ones. When we talk with our legislators, we talk about the fact that, you have to have access to these medications. You have to have access to the components of the medications, the treatments, the different healthcare supplies in order to actually make it effective, right? Last week, when I was in the congressional briefing on tariffs, we talked about the fact that, yes, you need the medications and we need research for the medications, and you need the 24 individual pieces of healthcare supplies to actually have one infusion. So, and 3.2 million people get infusions each year. So, it's very complicated. And I think our job is to pull that together for them. Again, I just think that things operate in such a silo at the government level that they forget that this isn't just a nice little tiny orphan cures issue. This pulls together a variety of things like the tariffs, step edits, all of that stuff.
So I think I mentioned we're preparing for a federal advocacy day later this week, and we chose a couple pieces of legislation to focus on. But our advocates were very passionate, and basically the description was the sky is falling. The sky is falling, and why aren't we doing something about it? And we I wouldn't frame it that way, perhaps, but that is how some individuals see it. And because it's an onslaught of so many different issues at the same time, and there's so many different concerns. So we actually, for the first time ever, are giving our advocates a little flexibility to zero in on an issue that's important to them. So we pulled together an overview of some of the issues at hand, things like tariffs, most favored nation, um, elimination of certain government agencies, research funding. We really, pulled facts and figures from a lot of different places and said, review these, find one that resonates with you, and share your concern with your lawmaker, because only that way are the lawmakers going to understand the true implications of all these different things that are being proposed. And the overall, it's just so much at once, that patients are panicking and organizations like ours are panicking too. But we're trying to be a little more, you know, conveying an organized, I don't want to say facade, but an approach to things. But we really do think it's important for those constituents, those patients, those members of their community to be able to reach out to them and verbalize the potential impact of some of these things that are being proposed. And so we're hopeful that that will resonate with some lawmakers because, again, those personal stories are so important. And we can always have them sign a, pre-written email, which we do through our advocacy center, but to have it really come from the heart in a conversation with the lawmaker or their staff, we think is going to be quite impactful.
And I'll just jump in. I mean, I think Sarah and Lisa pretty much covered this. I might add that, where do we want to get to? Sarah mentioned at the top, 5% of rare patients have treatments available. We need to get that to 95 to 100%. How do we get there? And the concerning features are we're likely not to get there by way of additional cuts to innovation and patient access. Some of those cuts have been mentioned already. We haven't talked a lot about the growth in the 340B program. That's certainly concerning, as more and more medicine utilization is falling under that umbrella, and therefore reducing the revenues back that are so important to research and development. And then on the middleman side of things too, the supply chain could certainly use some improvements, and so looking for opportunities and policies around those topics are important too. Karen, back to you.
And I was just looking at the chat. Somebody asked for a summary of these issues and like feedback on examples for all of these issues. We can try to follow up, but Lisa, it looks like you might have something.
So I don't want to be responsible for or cited for these pieces of information I've pulled together, but yes, we're happy to share it if it's not attributed back to us, just because I pulled it from various media sources and things are in flux, so it may or may not be 100% accurate by the time it's shared. But yes, we're happy to make available what we pulled together and encourage you to supplement it with additional information. Like I didn't have any information on Most Favored Nation when I pulled it together, but I think that would be a good add, as well as, I don't know about 340B and PBMs. I don't think most patients understand those topics, although I agree with you, John, they're major issues. So we tried to keep it more easily grasped, type concepts for patients who don't have that sophisticated of experience. But yes, happy to share.
And we
Fantastic.
have
So
we
go
have
ahead.
some documents too, and they tend to be one page or half a page. And I think we do have one on PBMs, and of course orphan cures, so that are more patient focused.
That is fantastic. So we can collect both of those and share them. And John, I know you all have amazing resources on a lot of issues. If you want to
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
a second.
No, thank you, Karen. I mean, I'll mention that I have a few colleagues who are also joining us today and would welcome if we do have a QR code available, we're happy to share that in the chat in terms of a weekly opportunity to stay abreast with the NPC research. So we release that on every Tuesday, and you can subscribe to our newsletter if that's of interest to you all. And then certainly on our website is another resource that we do have some explainers of our research in certain topic areas, whether they be one-pagers or other policy and evidence brief topics alongside the one that we discussed today, and published work as well. So thanks to Michael for adding that to the chat there.
Fantastic. And we will definitely follow up. We'll pull the information that was just mentioned. And I know we at Bio have some resources too. So we'll try to compile whatever information we can and share that with this group. We are almost out of time, but if there are any burning questions, I want to open it up for the audience just for a second in case anybody has something really urgent. Just please unmute yourself or raise your hand. Seeing none, and in the interest of time, this has been a tremendously amazing and insightful conversation. To close us off, I would love for each of you to just leave us with one thing that you want people in the audience to take away from the conversation today. And Sarah, could I start with you?
Sure. I think the one thing that I would want people to take away is that I think it's going to take a lot of voices and it's going to take a lot of energy. And I think we do have that breadth. If we can focus it and help people to get engaged, I think that is also healing for people with rare disease to be able to use their voice.
Perfectly said. Lisa?
I agree with Sarah. I'll just add that I think there's a place for education, educating the patient community as well as lawmakers about the issues because they're not experts and these are complex topics sometimes. So if we can simplify it in some way and find ways to communicate those issues in an easily understandable way, I think that'll go a long way in addition to the patient voices.
Fantastic. And John, from your perspective, what's the one thing you want people to take away?
Hard to boil it into one, Karen. I'd say at NPC, we're all about patient access today and tomorrow and in the future. We need your help to do the right research to inform good policy. So it's only with that will make a difference.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I learned so much in the conversation today. For me, the takeaway is there certainly are big threats to innovation, but there's also hope. There's hope with patient advocates like you, with researchers that are tackling the really difficult issues, and with policy solutions like the Orphan Cures Act that have strong bipartisan support and that look like hopefully they will be moving forward. We will be following up with the information we discussed. I've also tried to do a brief write-up of today's summary for our website, and we'll have a recording of today's conversation on our website in the next couple of days. Anytime, please reach out to me if you have any questions or ideas for topics to tackle in the future. And again, thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.